Georgia, Civic Math, Part 1. Last episode, we were in New Jersey, a small state positioned between two major powers, New York and Pennsylvania. And we saw something powerful. Location can shape influence. Today, we go even further south to a colony that was not just small, but very distant and exposed. Welcome to Georgia. In 1776, let's say Savannah, Georgia, was one of the largest cities in Georgia. Philadelphia, as we have covered, was one of the largest cities, actually the largest city at that time of the entire colonies. The distance between these two cities was roughly about 850 miles. 850 miles. Traveling distance between, let's say, from Savannah to Philadelphia, 850 miles, would have taken about 20, let's say 20 to 25 miles per day on horseback. Okay. So 20 to 25 miles per day, roughly, we are looking about, so 850 divided by 20 miles per hour, we're looking about 42.5. 850 divided by 25, roughly 34. So it would take anywhere from 34 to 42.5 days to cover the distance of 850 miles between Savannah, Georgia, and Philadelphia, PA. So 40 days of travel one way. Round trip, anywhere from 70 to 80 days. Georgia wasn't just politically distant, it was mathematically distant. Now, let's talk a little bit about key influential figure in Georgian politics. The first person uh, that is was one of the powerful figures of Georgia was Button Gwinnett. Second person was Lehman Hall, and the third person was Georgia Walton. We'll talk about these key figures in part two. Three representatives speaking for the colony. Compare that to larger colonies, more delegates, more debate, but in the end, one colony, one vote. One colony, one vote. Now, the turning point, just months before July 1776, Georgia began shifting through its provincial congress. Slower to unify, more divided, more cautious. Now here is the math. Georgia population was roughly about 40,000 people. The total colonies, as we recall, roughly 2.5 million. Doing the ratio, we're looking at about 1 to 2% of the general population of the colonies. That was in Georgia. But when it came time to vote, Georgia had 1 out of 13 votes. Georgia, 1 vote out of 13. So that's roughly 7.7% of the total population of the vote. So let's just think about that. 2% of the population controlling nearly 8% of the decision. And then there is a risk. Georgia sat next to British Florida. Closer to danger, fewer to people, less protection, higher risk per person. So when Georgia moved toward independence, it wasn't just political, it was mathematical. Distance, population, and risk all combined into one decision. Now, what's interesting about Florida is this. If Florida was controlled by the British, the other 13 colonies also were part of the British uh, colonial America. Why didn't Florida join for independence? This is what's interesting about Florida. Florida was gained by the British from the Spanish at the Treaty of Paris in 1763. So Florida in 1776 had been part of the British colonial empire in America only for 13 years. Now, in comparison, Virginia, Massachusetts, one of the largest colonial states at that time, had been part of Britain for 150 plus years. Florida, on the other hand, has been part of the colonial America only for 13 years. So 13 years versus 150 years, a completely different level of identity and resistance. On top of that, Florida had very few people living there, a few thousand, that's 1,000 people, really European settlers living there. Therefore, there was a heavy British military presence, and many settlers were loyalists, recent arrivals, people dependent on Britain. Unlike the 13 colonies, there was no deep-rooted colonial political class, no strong independence movement. The 13 colonies had assemblies, had political leaders, had experience resisting Britain. Florida, on the other hand, was more like governed directly by Britain. It had less local political power. And most importantly, there was no taxation without representation movement of scale. Florida relied heavily on British military protection. So, British military protection. He relied on British trade. So the risk of rebellion outweighed the political gain. While the 13 colonies were calculating independence, Florida was calculating survival on the British side. So that makes Georgia, or that puts Georgia in a very difficult position. Georgia wasn't just debating independence, it was sitting right next to a loyal British colony. That increased risk, pressure, and urgency. In part two, we are going deeper into the numbers, representation, influence, and what that really meant in 1776. If you are enjoying this Civic Math series, make sure you subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with one person because one person becomes two, and that is exponential growth. I'll see you in part two.